So just as I turned the corner, all I remember are these two couches, and they were just lined with feet on the floor and legs. And it hit me then that this was this patient's family and support system that was sitting there, and they didn't know that he had passed. And that haunted me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So long story short, I go back and I talk to the physicians a few weeks later about, was there anything we could have done differently to save that patient? And then I also posed the question to them, well, how often do you talk to the family about their risk? And about kind of how do they plan, and how do they like maybe get screened for these diseases? And the surgeons looked at me like I had three eyes and said, why would we? They're not our patient. And that was a light bulb moment for me.
What if the future version of you, your energy, vitality, even your lifespan could be altered with just a few small tweaks? What if by truly engaging with a handful of behaviors, you could shift the trajectory of your health and life? In this episode, I'm joined by Heather Holmes, co-founder of the longevity tech platform Illumient and the mind behind Halo, a tool that helps people plan their lives with clarity, intention, and a dash of scientific insight. Heather's journey weaves together healthcare business acumen and a deep desire to shift the way we think about well-being. She and her co-founder, a former Stanford geneticist, created Halo to help us not only understand our life expectancy, but empower us to do something about it. I recently took the Halo assessment myself, and to be honest, it quite surprised me. I've long held this quiet belief, perhaps shaped by my father's early passing, that I wouldn't live to a ripe old age. But Halo showed me that it's quite possible. It projected a life well into my 90s, prompting me to ask, what does this change about the way I live my life today? We explore life expectancy and lifespan and that triangle of genes, lifestyle, and environment. We unpack the invisible forces that influence how long and how well we live. And we dive into how tech can be a nudge, a mirror, and even an aid along the way. Because at the end of the day, regardless of how much money you accumulate, it's not worth it if you don't have a healthy lifespan to enjoy it. But Heather, I'm really excited to have you on. It's been a little bit getting organized with you because obviously you were in the States before and bit of a time zone difference, but now you're in Australia, and I'm wondering which part of Australia are you in, because it's a vastly different experience depending on where you are.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Joe. So I'm in Sydney right now, which is
Sunny.
where we are headquartered. Yes, but I have to say, one of the blessings of being able to work as part of a company that is, in a couple of countries, is that I get to spend a lot of time here in Australia, and with our headquarters being here. So I always make it a point on each time I come to work with the team to extend the trip to go see a different part of the country. And so this most recent trip actually did the train ride from Perth to Adelaide, and that was a pretty cool experience to actually get to go out there and see a little bit of what the outback looks like, and just have that whole experience. So you guys are blessed to live in such a beautiful, absolutely beautiful place.
Well, we are, and I'm embarrassed to say that you may have done a little bit more than me, because I've never done that, and that sounds really, really cool. I actually need to put that on the list, although they talk about taking stuff off the list to have more satisfaction in life. So I'm not sure what to do.
Well, I'll say one of the most spectacular parts of it, other than like I never thought I'd get my husband trapped in a train for 48 hours straight with only like two little short times you're allowed off, was that we stopped in a town called 𝐸∫. I think it was like population nothing, but the stars were absolutely breathtaking. The Milky Way was like something I've never seen. So that was like, to me, it's such like a once in a lifetime experience. And so I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about experiences and how important they are later on. But I've got some skin in the game in terms of this episode. I use Halo, which is a program that you have obviously co-founded and developed. And I've actually taken the test, the Halo test as well. So I'm planning on speaking to you a little bit about that and what it means, putting a little bit of my own personal experience into the episode. But I really wanted to start with sort of maybe you telling us a little bit about your background and your journey, and what led you to sort of build Halo. Why do you have an interest in this space?
Yeah, so people often ask me, like, my background is actually in the healthcare industry, but I work in the financial services industry. So, how on earth does this all come together? And the thing is, they actually are intersected way more than probably anybody really thinks about. But once you do, you start to understand the connection. So, I spent the most of my career in the healthcare industry before starting Halo, which is part of a company called 𝐸. And the reason why I started it was twofold. So my time in the healthcare industry, I worked for a multinational medical device company, and we worked on a very technical implant to solve a problem for a disease that impacts a lot of people. And unfortunately, most people don't find out that they have this disease until it's too late. And I can just share this a brief story. As one time I was called in by these physicians who I worked very closely with, and this is a type of procedure that the physician or the surgeon doesn't do without somebody like me present at the time. And so they called me. They said they had a patient being transferred in an ambulance. Obviously it was an emergency situation. They said it doesn't look good, but we're going to do whatever we can to try and save him. So I get to the hospital. We go into the operating room, and we do the implant. The patient was having internal bleeding out for what's called an abdominal aneurysm. And so we did the procedure, we did the implant, everything looked great. And just as the surgeon started to close up the patient, the anesthesiologist kind of leaned over the curtain to us, and they said, pressure's dropping, alarms start going off in the room. And what that means is that we're losing the patient. And so, despite heroic efforts, nothing could stop this internal bleeding. And I was standing right at this patient's left shoulder when they called his time of death. And that's something that really is a very impactful and very obviously very sad moment. And it really bothered me because, as I said, this was something that was not necessarily unavoidable, but easily to treat if it's caught early. And there was no reason why he had to show up as an emergency. But what actually, getting back to why did I start Halo, comes in just a second. So the way that you leave the operating room at this hospital, the only way to leave is you have to walk out through the family waiting area. So just as I turned the corner, all I remember are these two couches, and they were just lined with feet on the floor and legs. And it hit me then that this was this patient's family and support system that was sitting there, and they didn't know that he had passed. And that haunted me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So long story short, I go back and I talked to the physicians a few weeks later about, was there anything we could have done differently to save that patient? And then I also posed a question to them, well, how often do you talk to the family about their risk? And about kind of how do they plan, and how do they like maybe get screened for these diseases? And the surgeons looked at me like I had three eyes and said, why would we? They're not our patient. And that was a light bulb moment for me, that like trying to inform and empower individuals and their families to better understand their health, especially hereditary health risks, and be able to proactively plan for that, either through getting preventative action or planning financially, was a key thing. And so that was really the genesis of where Halo came from. Mm-hmm. And so, the secondary part of that story, which I'll try to keep very brief here, was at the same time my father was really ill, and he had been the key financial decision maker in our household, and made all the shots, and we all trusted him, and he was just a great financial guidance person to all of us. But what often happens is when you start getting older and start having more health challenges, is that also often starts impacting your financial decision making. They really often go hand in hand. And at that same time, while he was starting to have some major health issues, he started to make poor financial decisions that were totally out of character for him. And so he was hospitalized. And at that time, we found out he had made these financial choices that really impacted my mother. And we didn't know who we could trust. And we didn't know if this was good advice or bad advice. And ultimately, it was bad advice. but at that time we didn't know it. And I said to myself, if my father got out of the hospital, I was going to dedicate my life to helping make sure that families, just like that family I talked about at the OR, and families like myself, never have to doubt the advice that they're getting around
Mm.
how health can impact financial choices and be able to help families plan better. So those two things were instrumental in what caused me to leave my career and to go and start a tech company to solve that problem.
Oh, it's striking how much I resonate with those ideas. You know, my late father's battle with cancer also said the same things about, like, he was a financial advisor himself, but he was so consumed with the disease and trying to overcome it that, you know, some of the financial matters that probably needed to take to have some, you know, a more awareness around just were sort of maybe neglected, but for good reason. And so when I think about, you know, our practice as well, I think about being able to prevent the next young Joe from having to have the burden of a, you know, family business thrust upon their shoulders, and trying to, you know, help the conversations early around what happens if this and what happens if that, and
You're
why we've actually gone into the, you know, um, you know, patching on Halo into our practice to really, I suppose, give better clarity and awareness through data, and specific bespoke data for our clients around their aged care, potentially their longevity, their, you know, their healthy lifespan. Yeah. So I'm wondering, when you cast your mind back to the days at which you were engaged, I think you were saying you were working in a medical uh, facility of sorts, like a research.
I worked for a medical device company,
That
and
okay. Yep.
yes, yeah, I worked for a medical device company, and
Yep.
for a very clinical product that
Yep.
required, yeah, working in the OR, and I did that in the U.S. And actually, like, as I talked about, that this idea, I initially started in the U.S., and it was so successful that my company asked me to scale it up globally.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it in India and China. Then I moved to Southeast Asia, and that was where I was able to start really taking this concept and building it into the technology. Because the interesting thing was, it doesn't matter how much preventative information we tend to have from a health perspective. Oftentimes, what we see is people delay care or delay decisions because they're afraid of the financial impact and that financial burden to their loved ones. And so, really, what Halo is trying to do is to help people understand the good choices they can make today to either live healthier or live longer, but then also how to work with their advisor to make sure that they're financially protected. And I think your example, like what you're just talking about with your father, the example that I had, the reality is that all of us are going to be in that situation at some point for someone we love, and at some point that will happen to us. So it's like, how do we do the best that we can to plan and prepare today so that when those moments happen, at least we have these steps in place to protect ourselves. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's really the message that I want to do, is try and give that peace of mind to each family, by having these conversations with you, that at least when those moments happen, it's you've got that part taken care of.
Yeah. So when you were working with that medical device company, like, you know, and correct me if you feel that this might be a biased view of the world, but when I look at our, you know, current system of operating, you know, where there's a focus on work and career, and which is obviously important, especially where it's meaningful. But there's almost a compulsion, and it kind of takes us away sometimes with what contributes to healthy lifespan, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this idea of overwork, consumption of fast food, you know, social isolation. There are factors built into the Halo system that, when you actually look at it, a lot of the things that we're doing as a society, in Western society today, is challenging that. It's actually challenging to move in the direction of what Halo is suggesting. And I think in some ways the system itself encourages, or doesn't encourage enough, the positive aspects, to my liking anyway. I wonder whether I'm too negative on that, or whether that seems to be an honest appraisal of what's going on.
I mean, look, I think we're all busy, and it's easy for us to just do what's comfortable and easy along that. And that's where it was a big aha moment for me, where it's like, look, we all know we should exercise more, eat better, drink less. But what can be difficult is to actually do those things that you always think there's tomorrow. And like the reality though is these little steps now make a difference. And what we've learned is through Halo, the way we try to present the information back to each person in a very personalized way to them is to show them, like, here's your current scenario based on your current health, based on your family history, based on the key lifestyle factors that impact longevity and well-being. So looking at all those, here's where you are today. But then if there's anything from a lifestyle perspective that you could do, or you could start doing only if you want, like no judgment if you don't want to, but here's like, if you wanted to make these changes, this is actually how in real time it could give you more active, healthy years. And more importantly, how could it reduce potentially those later slow go years? Because I think those are the ones that probably keep most of us up at night, is that fear of later in life not being able to take care of ourselves or do the things that we want to do. So if we can show you, and Halo does a great example of this, where you could maybe improve those lifestyle features that can give you more active years and reduce those slow go years, would you do it? And you don't have to, but I think it's better to understand and then be able to make a more informed decision.
Agree. And I think so. You've partnered with a Stanford University academic, is my understanding, and was involved in the 23andMe delivery as well, if I'm not mistaken.
So my
is that
co-founder,
right?
so my co-founder, Dr. Emily Chang, who's one of the most brilliant scientists and amazing women that I know. And so, yes, everything that Halo it does is based very strictly on the science. And we have a really rigorous vetting process and approach to our algorithm, which is proprietary. And so if I may brag on for 2 seconds,
Yes, please.
Dr. Emily. So not only is she a very good person, but she is brilliant. And so she did her PhD and her postdoc at Stanford in computational genetics before working as a scientist at the personal genetics company 23andMe. And it was while she was at 23andMe and I was working on this concept that we were introduced, and we just shared this same philosophy, but from two different sides of the healthcare industry. And so we teamed up together, and she really is the brains behind how do we thoughtfully assemble the data and the methodology to make sure that we're bringing the best in class of science and medical research into how we make these projections for these sort of conversations.
No, I mean, it's still early in the episode, but, I wondered whether we could get laser sharp on exactly what Halo does in, reasonably succinctly, so that everyone knows exactly what it kind of is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So basically, Halo's designed specifically for you, those of you who are listening, to be able to take an assessment using the best of science, to then be able to have a more thoughtful conversation with your advisor about how does these sort of findings play into the financial decisions. And they really do. Things like aged care, things like longevity. As people are living longer, you want to make sure that your finances and your financial plan is going to last. And so what we do is, it is an assessment that you can go through in the privacy of your own home. You can do it together with your advisor, wherever you're most comfortable. And you go through this assessment. It should take you less than 5 minutes to complete. It uses family health history, similar to when you go to your doctor and you're asked by your doctor who in your family had this health condition or that health condition. We look at your lifestyle. We look at other kind of factors around that. And then that's it. Our algorithm will run the full analysis and come back with a detailed report that goes directly to Joe. And then Joe and you can sit down and have a conversation about, at a high level, how do these factors impact how you guys want to plan together. And so one thing I should probably point out is sometimes people say, well, I don't know if I want to share all the details of my answers with somebody. So that we've actually thought really long and hard about that. So there's a delicate balance of the answers you as the individual put into the assessment are kept private and confidential. The report that is shared with Joe only shows the high level results that go back to the financial planning conversation. So we don't share the details of how many fruits and vegetables you're eating, or like what your BMI is. Those things we keep confidential. We just share at a high level. Here's kind of where you're at. Here's kind of where you could optimize. And then here's like what longevity looks like for you, so that you can take, Joe can take those key numbers and make a more thoughtful plan.
Yeah. And so, interestingly as well, I think a lot of people, when they undertake something like this, they are worried about the outcome, and I often feel that their genes is sort of sealing their fate. And so there's a reticence to actually take up, a questionnaire like that from that perspective. And I would say I'm kind of in that bucket as well. I not only did this particular questionnaire, but I've also going to engage with HealthScreen, which is like a private medical concierge, which is going to look into a biological age test and a genetic panel covering 167 cancer and cardiac genes. And given my family's history with cancers and so on, it's made me a little worried about what I'll find. But when I took the Halo questionnaire, I realized that there are some environmental kind of factors and some lifestyle factors that can help my genes express themselves in maybe a more positive or a more healthy way. And so that's sort of area of what we call epigenetics. And I really want to sort of talk about the sort of triangle approach that you have with respect to healthy lifespan and how that fits into this conversation.
Yeah, so I think this is such a huge misconception. So often people are like, look, there's been so much hype about genetics, and there's so much good that's been coming out of that. But like, if I can let you in on the little secret, your genes are just one part of the story. And that is why your doctors continue to ask you about family health history, because that is the single strongest predictor of future disease risk and the medical gold standard. And so the way that I would describe it to people is that your genes are kind of like that roadmap, or kind of that blueprint of what it could be to come. But the other factors tell your genes whether to turn on or off. So that's where lifestyle and environment come in. And because different lifestyle factors, different environmental factors can impact your genetic makeup differently than somebody else who might have the exact same genetic makeup but live somewhere else. So you may see, like you brought up cancer, you might see that cancer, you have that risk of cancer, and maybe that is something that you get diagnosed with, where somebody else who has that exact same genetic makeup never gets it. And so the interesting thing with epigenetics is these different lifestyle and environmental factors, and how do they trigger your genes. And so going back to that triangle of lifestyle, environment, and genetics, if you think about it, in your family, you grow up in the same household, you tend to grow up in the same environment in that household. You tend to have similar lifestyle factors just because that's the behaviors of the family. And you also share genes with your family. And so that is why family health history is that strong predictor, because it is that kind of triangulation of those three things together in a very easy and accessible way to understand the risk. But going back to that, just as we were talking about, the genes kind of tell you that blueprint. Lifestyle and environment, we know, can help trigger things on or off. So that's where there's so much in each person's individual control. So understanding that, and then understanding the lifestyle or environmental factors that could be problematic, that gives you a chance to change them. Your genes are not your destiny. And I think that's the most important thing, that if we can get people to take away one message from here, is that there's so much that you can control. And that's why, like, the knowledge is power. And so you going and taking those steps is amazing.
Thank you. I was happy to see, still kind of questioning it in my mind, that, I may end up between 95 and 97, depending. The difference between 95 and 97 is depending on whether I take up my mother's advice and eat more of fruits and vegetables, which I'm thinking 2 years at the end like that, I'm not sure it's worth it. But but I suppose
you have a very high longevity probability, and yeah, I see you on that for sure.
Yeah. So, it asked, I think a good way of determining what's important is also determining or looking at what is being asked. And so, some of the questions that were asked maybe weren't surprising to me, but I think the way that it was kind of the sequence that it was asked in and what it computed was more of a surprise to me.
Mhm.
But, asking questions on how many how many servings of fruits and vegetables you actually have, as an example, what other questions are asked?
Yeah, so like as we talked about, we look at like things like family history around the biggest health conditions, the biggest kind of causes of death and risk there. But then we also look at things like fruits and veggies. We look at how you exercise. We look at things like your social support. That's actually a huge factor. If we talk about things, especially during COVID and isolation, we know that that has such a negative impact on your health. But like, who's in your network of social support? It doesn't have to be a huge network, but it's like, who can you count on and call on? That does make a real difference in your overall longevity and health span. So all in, we look at a series of different lifestyle and factors. We look at, and these are all the ones that have the greatest impact on future longevity and health span. So we don't look at like every little factor that may only change your longevity by a few days or weeks. We're looking at the big ones that are going to change how you would think about your future financial plan and how you need to be planning for that.
Yeah, and I was just super buoyed by the fact that, sometimes you get a little bit YouTube fixated and there's too many people telling you too many things. But I was super buoyed by the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I really like the fellow by the name of Peter Attia, who's got a podcast called The Drive, and someone I follow quite a lot. I quite respect his opinions on a lot of things. And looking at the Halo reports, it's interesting that from an increasing lifespan point of view, exercise as a lifestyle factor had a greater impact on increasing my lifespan than the kidney cancer history had in decreasing my lifespan from a genetic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so this focus on how my father passed or my grandfather passed or anyone in my family passed, I think there are some lifestyle factors that are so powerful, and one of them, the biggest, I think, from what I'm seeing here, exercise is the biggest bang for buck.
Exercise is a huge impact. Obviously smoking will have the most negative impact on your longevity and health span, but you're not a smoker, so that was a great positive there. I
Yeah.
mean, and I think looking at your results, the other interesting thing was, I mean, you have a good history of family longevity, so that's also a nice little boost to you. I thought it was interesting when you and I were chatting before how you initially had been thinking your longevity would be much lower than what it was. And so it sounds like Halo might have opened your mind or changed your perspective around that a little bit.
Yeah, it did. And you know what else? It's like really interesting that, and sorry to the listeners, it's not all about me. I just think it's interesting to talk about it in a more personal way. I think it's more interesting than talking about it generically. But I just think that it shifted my focus because of the mindset that I've had quietly that, oh, geez, I don't know that I've got a long life ahead of me. I've
Mm-hmm.
actually focused a lot on current consumption,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot on, well, I might not be here. So, my dad wasn't. So maybe I'm not going to be here. And then, so I've made choices that have been about the now, and some have been maybe a little bit too much on that side. And I think what shifted is that if I do have a longer lifespan, then I do maybe want to protect future Joe a little bit more than I have considered in the past. And that's in a number of different areas, not just financial accumulation. Just thinking out loud around relationships and things like that, investing the time in the now so that I have a good community around me when I'm in the ripe old age of 95, maybe. Um, so, so yeah, what is it? What is, in your experience, what has shifted for people when they undertake this sort of evidence-based approach to looking at their lifespan?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things that we hear consistently, and there's also external data that backs this up, is that I think we as individuals do a horrible job of really kind of thinking about that future state of us when we're older and what does that look like. And the research is clear, and we see it in our data, that most people underestimate just how long the reality is of them potentially living, which is great. Like if you're living longer, and most clients who work with a financial advisor tend to live well beyond the average. And that's what we see because our projections are personalized to each individual. We're able to match them in our data set to somebody as similar to them as possible. So it's like you're getting really personalized numbers, which is really good data to have as better data and assumptions going into the plan. But that not understanding how likely it is for somebody to live well into their 90s or maybe even their late 90s. And if you know that, then how would you shift how you want to enjoy your life today and plan for today? Another thing that we constantly hear back from the advisors we work with are that business owner, that entrepreneur who loves to work. My husband is a great example of this, where he's like, I am never retiring. I'm working for forever and ever and ever. And it's like, that's great. And that's wonderful if that's what you want to do. But like, let's also look at that in the perspective of how many active, healthy years are we planning for? And how, like, when do we think that based on your unique makeup, you might kind of start slowing down and start having health challenges? Because he may think that he's never going to retire and he's going to put off all these trips or all these activities with loved ones. But when he finally does, he may not have as many active, healthy years as he would like. So like what we've seen is like that reflection with the way Halo presents that information of saying, okay, maybe it is okay to give myself permission to go take that trip to Africa now, maybe put off another trip till later, but just to kind of understand the trade-offs and be able to just make better choices. I mean, for myself, I work all the time, but what Halo has helped me do is with my own mother is to give me the pause to think like I shouldn't put off that trip. Like I might think I can do it next year. I really should do it this year. And so I use that as a good way of like helping keep me honest to making sure that I'm living to the life that I want with the people that I love.
I wonder, we talk about underestimation. I wonder whether from a qualitative perspective, people underestimate because it is probably more qualitative or maybe a bit more subjective is probably the word for it. But like, when they ask the questions around social support and who's in your corner, I wonder whether people underestimate the importance of that. Like your husband, as an example, or many business owners might be getting social support from obviously their family, but also their work. And then when work is no longer around, they haven't considered potentially what's the social support, what's the community look like post-working life as well. And so Halo sort of indicates that it's a super important consideration. Do you have any color around why?
Why
I mean,
people
it's
don't?
intuitive. I think it's intuitive.
I don't like for that. I don't. But I think that's kind of the tale as old as time is, right? You hear somebody working their whole life. I could think of my father as an example, and then he retired, and that was his whole life, right? And then it's easy to get depressed and to not be there with it. So like our hope is that with Halo, with having these planning conversations with you, Joe, that you and the client together are able to start thinking in advance as to how are we going to make that transition, or how are we going to find the things that are fulfilling as you make that transition. Because obviously you are thinking about all these other dimensions beyond the money. The money is just the vehicle to help somebody be able to live their best life. And so, yeah.
And I think, thinking about the sort of social support side of it as well, you kind of cast your mind to elderly individuals, one who's passed and then the other one passes soon after. And, during COVID times, I remember listening to a podcast and them talking about a protein being secreted as a result of isolation and loneliness, which is responsible for immune system issues. So there was a 𝐇𝐞𝐞𝐭, it was called, I think, from memory. And so there is some sort of direct sort of correlation between a kind of loneliness and your lack of support and a diminishment of health, which is probably why it's coming up as an important factor as well in that in the software. So I wondered, moving on a little bit, if people are likely to live longer than they think, what do you think some of the changes may be around how they plan their lives currently?
Some of the changes that they might think.
Yeah.
I think that's as unique as each individual, to be fair with that. You know, that's a great question. I think it's really dependent on each individual person as to how they want to do that. As I said, we've had some clients who've come back and they've said, I've now being more serious about optimizing my diet and lifestyle because I don't want to have any of those slow-go years, or I saw how many there were, and I want to get that number down. We've had other people who, when they see, as we talked about, their active healthy phase, because we'll project how many active healthy years somebody has to look forward to before they get to that, what we call that slow-go phase, or that extended care phase. Where they just are like, I need to make these changes and to do something about it. But I could say, like, from like a personal example, my husband and I, he's a bit older than me. He's about 9 years older than myself. And he's always like, he's going to live for forever and we're going to die together. And I'm like, but the reality is that even if we were the same age, that's not going to happen. I mean, women, it's shown in the data, tend to live longer than men. But even so, like, I also have in my family history, I have a much higher probability of family members who've lived a long life. So for all these different factors, it doesn't. But for us, like, for him to be able to take his halo and me to take mine and have a more data-driven discussion around, here's the reality of how long the probability of you living, even if he lives into the 90s, like, I'm still probably looking at 10, 15, maybe more years on my own. So how do we make sure that I'm also taken care of when you're no longer here? So, that might not be the sexiest conversation. I will say that that's a fear that especially a lot of women have. And so being able to have less emotional conversation and a more kind of third party, independent, data driven conversation makes those conversations easier to have.
That makes a lot of sense. I was also thinking a little bit about moving the conversation into the money side. Now, obviously, I don't necessarily need to talk about the financial planning side, but obviously this program has been developed as an intermediary between financial advisors and their clients. But, more than that, at a higher level, there are certain strategies, changes that occur as a result of understanding with more clarity what your expected lifespan may be, but also how many years you'd be in extended care potentially, and the differential, as you've just kind of described, between your results and your partner's results. What sort of things do financial planners talk to their clients about that have been informed by Halo? Or, even if you just did it yourself without a financial advisor, what kind of insights might you gather about the way that you come at decisions with money?
For sure. So Halo is the only way somebody can get access to Halo is through their financial professional, because we purpose built this. The data is kept private between the advisor and the client, and like I said, we only share the high results with you. But the conversations are as varied as the individuals. So we've had clients that now, like, I'm speaking here of I'll use U.S. terminology because this is a U.S. specific client.
Yep, sure.
But this was a client who the advisor had been meeting with them, both the husband and the wife, for many years, and he was really concerned that they weren't going to have enough money later in life to take care of them. So he was, in his conversations, he felt very strongly they needed to look at some protection, some income protection. And the clients were always like, oh, next year, when we have, they just never really wanted to take that next step. And he was quite concerned. So when he started using Halo, he introduced it to them in advance of their next meeting. they took the assessment. They showed up the next morning because they were so aware of going through the Halo assessment and seeing that high level snapshot of what their results looked like, they were really concerned, and they wanted to talk about how could they make sure that they were going to be protected. So that was like a really motivational conversation for them, and it opened their eyes as to why waiting maybe it wasn't the right solution. We've had conversations where it's been a great permission to spend. The clients have been doing such a great job saving, and this has been a fun way to say, look, now we have taken the most conservative planning based on your potential aged care needs, based on like how long, because you have this great longevity and living a long life. Now we've kind of really pressure tested this plan and made sure that you're going to be safe. So now let's talk about how we can play more and have more fun and do things. So it's different for each person, but the end message is that none of us can escape these things. And so let's use the best of data and science to just make sure you're protected. And then you don't have to worry about it again. And then you can go back to all the other things that you want to do.
Awesome. It seems quite transformational. Speaking as a financial advisor and already using it, it's done a number of things for our practice. Number one, when it comes to the calculation of projections, there is a greater degree of confidence and clarity that the inputted numbers actually make sense to the client, rather than using just the usual statistical averages and life expectancies that we all do. We're actually putting in data that reflects what's actually happening with the client. The extended care aspect of it as well in there, it sort of shows how many years of extended care may be possible, and that can actually be factored into some sort of medical capital amount that's earmarked for a particular time frame. And then the difference between client and partner in terms of their statistical life expectancy can also be built into projections. And it can also inform things like, do we gift more money to our kids now versus delay it as well, depending on how confident we are we'll be able to deal with our medical costs later on. So it's actually quite profoundly game changing in a sense. And that's not to say that there aren't anomalies where this data doesn't actually come to fruition, but it's more accurate, right?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, how else, when you're doing a plan with a client, how else are you planning for, let's say, like longevity to their plan? The status quo in the financial services industry is using an actuarial table, which, if you think about it, is nothing more than a population-based average. So already the plan here, if you're using something like that, is not customized to the individual. What we're doing is giving probabilities all the way out to age 110, and then both you and your client can then have a more data-driven conversation as to how far out do we want to take this plan and make sure that we're okay. But plan is only as good as the data and the assumptions are that go into it. And I think it's a huge miss for anybody who's just planning with averages or actuarial tables or just a set number. I think you really should be using the best of science and data to make sure that the plan lasts and can really help the client.
So really, from a point of view of Halo, it's really about awareness, because in my mind, it's a game changer and it's a no-brainer. It absolutely should be used across the board. But at the moment, we still got a profession that largely uses, again, the statistical averages, and I hope that changes. Hopefully this podcast helps a few advisors, move towards this. So I was interested to hear a little bit about the fact that you felt, and I don't know if there was evidence but around where you don't look after these factors and these aspects that help you with your lifespan, and it actually impairs your financial decision making potentially. That's really interesting, because Halo can help you determine what to improve so your financial decision making can improve, but then also what Halo produces as an outcome can also help make decisions around your finances as well. So it's kind of like you're killing two birds with one stone in a sense. So could you tell me a little bit about that idea of not getting it right from a health perspective and how it impacts financial decision making?
Yeah, well, the classic example that I think keeps most advisors up at night is like the Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that. I mean, this is just one extreme example that I'm going to just discuss here.
Mm.
But
Mm.
obviously, some of the earliest indicators tend to be things that the advisor is seeing. And maybe there's a client is asking different questions or is not as engaged in the meeting, or maybe like their spending patterns or things like that are starting to look a little different. And I've heard from countless advisors of this uncomfortable space of where something doesn't seem right, but they don't know, like, if they should, if it's just a one-off or if this is a sign of something. And then it's a question of, well, like, who do I talk to, or how do I bring this up with the client, or do I need to, is it so bad we need to go beyond the client? And
Mhm.
so something like Halo, my hope is that advisor clients can have a more upfront conversation long before there are any potential financial decision making issues, so that if something like forgetfulness or challenges start to happen, there's a set agreement between the advisor and the client in advance as to how the client would like those situations to be addressed to protect the client. And
Mm.
so that is my ultimate goal, as to where I would like to see us, especially going beyond where we are today, to help facilitate those conversations more. But my hope is that as advisors are having these halo conversations with their clients, and we can see and understand there's different health risks, that opens a conversation about, if for some reason your decision making seems a little different, what is the process that you would like me to go with, or who would you like me to talk with, or do you not want me to speak with anybody? Because I've seen so many advisors be put in this very uncomfortable situation where something doesn't quite feel right, but there haven't been those conversations early on as to how would the client want to handle those situations.
I think it's great when I think about the previous recorded podcast episodes that I've had with Hannah Conkey, who's got a sort of neurobiology background and sort of executive coaching, and also Cherry Cashel, who's a GP who focuses on hormone health, and they talk about this idea of just small things like getting enough sleep and getting enough bright light exposure and so on, and the fact that if you're not getting that, it's not helping you from a hormonal perspective. And poor hormone health leads to bad financial decision making, because you're literally going through a foggy brain depression kind of scenario. And so Halo, along the same route, the same idea is sort of really making sure the fundamentals are taken care of so that you can make good decisions. Because often the excuse is made that I'm too busy, I can't do this, I can't do that, because I'm actually making financial decisions. But are you making the right one?
Yes, exactly.
So, in this world where we're increasingly obsessed with life extension, is it really about life extension, or is it more about improving healthy life extension as well? Because I do think there's this kind of just keep going kind of thing as long as we can, but are you actually enjoying it? And
yeah, I agree. There's a huge debate, especially in Silicon Valley, around wanting to everybody live for forever or as long as possible. I can only speak from my perspective and Dr. Emily's perspective. We're way more interested and focus on how can you have the best healthy, active health span. It's not about who can live the longest, because from our perspective, it's much more beneficial to live a really active, healthy life, reduce those later aged care years as much as possible, because that's where living can really happen. Not to say that you can't when you're in those later aged care phases, but from my personal perspective, I don't want to live to be 110 and have 10 years of that or 15 years of that where I'm incapacitated and not able to go do the things I love to do, like riding horses or travel or whatever. I'd much rather optimize my life to be as active, as healthy as possible for as long as possible. possible. So I think it's up to each individual, but I know our bias is how can we help people understand how they can live their best life and have that as many active, healthy years as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel the same way about the 110 thing. I'm a bit cautious about the 95 thing as it is. Just wondering as well with respect to Halo, what's next on the agenda? Is there anything that needs to change that you're excited by? Any new developments? Like what's on the sort of horizon for Halo?
For sure. So we have a laundry list of a backlog of all the things that we continue to want to do and implement with it. So we're always staying on top of the science and the data. That's first and foremost for what we do. And then also Halo operates as its own independent thing. We also have been acquired by Lumient. So what enticed me to want to get involved with Halo with Lumient was because this look at all the different dimensions of well-being that create a fulfilled life and really help people, because it's not really how much money you have, it's how you are living your life and using your money to make yourself happy and to live those good things. And so health and well-being and longevity are important parts of that kind of well-being. Then it's also how do we look at the other factors around that? So as we talked about, like social isolation or involvement, what other things make people fulfilled? Those are all the different dimensions that Lumient sits in. And so it's just a natural tie-in together. So a big focus for us right now is to bring these two things together so that there can be an even more seamless experience around how does somebody plan for that best life.
And I suppose an area that could we could as advisors spend more time in, but I imagine that you'd be thinking about as well is just the potential strategies or the potential solutions to the issue of social support, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are we telling our clients? What are the suggestions that are coming out of the Halo program for improving that sort of scenario? All of those types of things, I imagine, are super important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it comes to, so, rounding up the episode, and it's been great, and I appreciate you indulging me in talking about my own personal thing. Hopefully the listeners enjoyed it and the community enjoyed it. But I wondered whether you've been asked the question, if you had actually only one extra year, and touch wood that's not the case, but if you only had one extra year of good health, what you would do with it?
Oh, I've not been asked that. That's a great question. I think to me, it's like, I'm very into my equestrian sports and to my horses. So it would be spending as much time out there with them. And then it would be, my other passion, which would be traveling with my loved ones. But those are two things I can't imagine ever having to give up. And so I'd be trying to pack in as much of that as I could be. So I think that would be my answer.
Awesome. Well, I think I'm really glad to have done this with you, because I think it serves to many purposes. But the two that I can come to mind is obviously those individuals who are thinking about their own health span, which is, I think, the vast majority of us, but then also financial advisors and how they can really incorporate this additional evidence-based data that can really impact their financial plans and the way they talk about money to their clients. I think both these things are just super, super important, and I appreciate the time that you've taken with me to go through it so comprehensively. It's awesome what you're doing.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a lot of fun. I love your passion around health and well-being and bringing more of this interesting information out for people. So it's been a lot of fun today.
Awesome. Thanks.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.